Kacper and Denis here for Submission Radio. Going into UFC 200, what was supposed to be one of the biggest cards of all time, now up for debate as Jon Jones is officially out of his fight with Daniel Cormier. It's breaking news, and we're here to discuss our reactions. Kacper, I mean, we were working on some scrums, we were doing some weigh-in stuff. This didn't even cross our mind, and then we get the news that there's going to be a mystery press conference. I mean, we were all thinking it was going to be the UFC sale, Fedor, a bunch of different stuff. I was scared that Brock Lesnar was going to pull out. Someone said Vince McMahon changed his mind. What was your initial reaction when you saw and heard Dana White say that Jon Jones was out of this thing?
Yeah, and just quickly, I'll second that when we were sort of lining up waiting for this mystery press conference, I and everybody else thought it was the sale. And then when Dana White came out, he didn't really seem bummed. He sort of seemed in a semi-cheery mood. I mean, serious mood, but something like as if a big announcement was going to happen, but not, not the main event of UFC 200, being pulled from the card. And you mentioned Brock Lesnar. It's crazy because leading into UFC 200, surrounding Brock Lesnar's fight, the controversy there was his exemption from the UFC and, therefore USADA. And a lot of people question, what's the deal with Brock Lesnar, as far as his, his past, what he could or could not be taking. And yet it's Jon Jones himself, who's the one who potentially fails a drug test.
It's an interesting situation because I was sitting there sort of looking at Dana, looking at what was going on. And Dana actually joked with everyone and said, was joking around about the fact that, it wasn't a UFC sale. And I bet you guys thought it was a UFC sale. I mean, everybody in the room thought it. But my initial reaction when I realized that it was actually Jon Jones and the main event was canceled, it was almost like shock to me. I mean, it's happened before. But for some reason, this time around, I really believe Jon Jones turned everything around. I mean, he looked good, he looked healthy, he looked happy. Everything seemed to be going well. A lot of people, like myself, were predicting for him to become the champion once again. It really sort of took me back. It took me a couple of seconds. I almost felt like, and I don't know about you, Cass, but tell me if you felt the same way, that the room the oxygen sort of left the room in that second, and people were just sort of trying to get their head around it.
Well, people were sort of in this funny mood where nobody was really stressed. It was kind of like, why are we called here? It's probably the UFC sale, and that's not something that really puts a damper on your spirits. And then when it's Jon Jones is out, it's like, wow, people got a lot more serious, which is funny considering that, no one took really the UFC sale that seriously because there were so many other reports. One thing that we can't understand, actually two things. One is that we don't know what exactly happened with the test. It's extremely fresh. It was from a June 16th test that we only just found out about. I think it was literally in the last hour to 30 minutes that the fighters were notified. Brock Lesnar and Mark Hunt, they don't even know at the moment, apparently, that they're main eventing the pay-per-view. But the other thing that I want to note is there's two big losers here. Well, actually, there's a few. There's the fans, the public, people who are enjoying this fight or looking forward to this fight. There's Jon Jones, of course, himself, and there's Daniel Cormier, who stands to lose a huge amount of money. Of course, he was going to be getting those pay-per-view points from not only the UFC 200 being such a big card because of himself and Jon Jones being the main event, but Brock Lesnar being on the card. He now misses out. Dana White basically said that there's no confirmation whether he will be compensated because he does make a decent amount of money, and he may not be reimbursed for his camp, let alone make that big payday that him and his whole family were hoping for.
Now, Joe Silva was in the air, and Dana White, it was really interesting. Dana White was sort of in this group text message with him and the Fatita, and sort of discussing this, and we sort of saw Joe's reaction when he tweeted back, shocked. It's an interesting situation because now Dana waits for Joe to touch down, and then they're going to look at potential opponents, last-minute opponents for DC. I mean, you and me had a look at the rankings. We've been sort of racking our brains. Who could replace him? A few days' notice. I mean, anyone in your head, anyone that would make sense as a replacement. We've got Teixeira and Johnson. They're fighting at 202. Personally, I think another Johnson fight wouldn't really make sense. It's too soon. Maybe a Teixeira fight. Also, a possible heavyweight, if it's around the 220-pound area, might be suitable. Anyone in your head that would make sense to fill in for this card? And if it's not a big name, should the move be made? Does it make the card worse if it's like a Daniel Cormier versus someone without any real name value?
So there's a few ways of looking at it. If you're Daniel Cormier, you want to stay on this card and you want to make those pay-per-view points. Now, if he does fight, say, a random heavyweight, let's say somebody, and Daniel said that he's willing to fight at around about up to 225 pounds. Most of the heavyweights are big, and especially if we're talking about, heavyweights of an elite caliber. And I mean, do you really want to see Daniel Cormier facing, a top 15 or top 20 heavyweight? I don't think so. And even if he does, he's probably not going to be in the main event. So does he really get those pay-per-view points? And then if we're talking light heavyweight, if you're Glover Teixeira or Anthony Rumble Johnson, why would you take that fight? You've got a fight in a couple of months. I mean, you may be, let's say you lose the fight here. You've got, what, 2-3 days? How many days are we away? It would be a battle just to make that weight, let alone fight, you know, the actual champion of the division. So, and if you do lose, there's a good chance you're not going to be fighting for the title anytime soon. You might as well take your chances in this, you know, unofficial title eliminator. The only sort of reason I would see Anthony Rumble Johnson or Glover Teixeira, which for me are really the only two guys that I would see, you know, even remotely ready. I mean, you could have a Gustafsson fight, but is he ready? Is he training? My thoughts, probably not. The only reason why any fighter would take this would be for the payday.
Yeah, that's right. And just the flight over here from Gustafsson might be a tough one.
Yeah.
He
wouldn't make it in time for UFC 200 in that flight.
That's a crazy thing to think about. I mean, okay, so a lot of people saying UFC 200 one of the biggest cards of all time. This fight is now gone. I think personally this actually hurts the card in the sense that it no longer has that sort of biggest card of all. It's still a great card, but this was the cherry on top. It got taken away from us. Brock Lesnar, the main event of UFC 100. Now, out of nowhere, UFC 200, he's the main event again. To yourself, Kacper, how much, I mean, we're going to be covering it, we're going to be there, but how much does this take away from the mystique of UFC 200?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it takes away from the mystique. You still have a good main event. And look, in a lot of ways, Brock Lesnar and Mark Hunt was the fight that overshadowed a lot of the other fights anyway. So I don't think this really hurts the card that much, not like it would have, say, other cards. This card certainly didn't hinge on Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones. This was the B plan anyway. I don't think it hurts it too much. I just think when we look back in history and we talk about the greatest cards of all time, this one may fall short just a little bit, because I think at the moment, or heading into this card, people are saying this is unequivocally, undisputed, the greatest card of all time. And now, at least there's a little bit of debate.
Well, there you guys go. We'll be on hand breaking down everything from UFC 200. Stay tuned. Go to submissionradio.com for all the latest updates and check out what's going on with UFC 200.